Hey, it's Marcel. Before we kick off this episode, just a reminder that I have joined Substack, and one of the features of Substack may pique your interest. It's the green room. Let me explain. At the end of each episode now, we're going to continue the conversation in the green room over at Substack. The green room is where I ask my world-renowned guests questions you're not going to get anywhere else. And not just any questions, but topics that appeal to the everyday leader struggling to juggle priorities, motivate people, deal with conflict, etc. I'm going to put the link to my Substack in the show notes if you'd like to join us for more private conversation. So check it out after this episode. Click on the link, and we'll see you over there. Enjoy the show. Welcome to the Love in Action Podcast, the show that explores all the ways you can evolve into the best version of yourself as a leader. I'm your host, executive coach, speaker, and author, Marcel Schwantes. I believe that when we show up with our full humanity to work and lead from a place of love and care and inclusion, it will make a radical difference in your leadership, your business, and your bottom line. This is a show about love as a leadership and business strategy. Let's do this. Hey, welcome to the show. Guess what? I have news, good news. If you've been following my journey with this book writing that I've been dropping, hints about the things that I'm learning as I write my book. Well, the book is done. It's off to the publisher, and it's out of my hands. And I have a title, and I want to share the title with you. The future of leadership is humane. We've all heard of, topics of human leadership and the future of work, it's human, that kind of thing. But who talks about being humane? So that's the title of my book. And by the way, I'm still juggling which one's going to be. The subtitle has to be just as important. So the one that's winning out right now is Leading with Radical Love in a Chaotic World. How does that strike you guys? Well, I like it, but there's a second one that is starting to gain some ground. I just put out a survey on LinkedIn, if you haven't seen it yet, and I asked my readers on my LinkedIn newsletter to vote on 3 options. So the one that I just read, Leading with Radical Love in a Chaotic World, is winning. But inching right behind that one is Lead with Love and Be a Kick-Ass Boss. And that one's gaining fast ground as well. So I'm curious which one you might, gravitate towards. And leave me a comment on my website, or go to my Substack page and drop a hint there about which one I should actually have. All right, so the topic of my book, it's practical love. It's love that we've been talking about in this podcast for 5-6 years now, right? It's actionable, practical love, not love the squishy emotion. It's love the verb, right? It's backed with intent and to produce great results. So chapter 5 of my book tackles the topic of leadership humility. We've talked about this on the show many, many times. I've brought on guests that have written on the topic, right? And it's an important topic, humility, because we're all attracted to confidence in leaders, right? But take one wrong step, and then you're going to find arrogance. So humility solves that problem. And I first encountered this often misunderstood word in Jim Collins' seminal book, Good to Great. Collins basically said that the best leaders direct their ego away from themselves to the larger goal of leading their company to greatness. And as he found in his vast research, these leaders gain an edge by displaying both fierce professional will. They know where they're going. They know how to get there. They're all driven and looking for results. but they couple that with extreme personal humility. So it's really a paradox. And this paradoxical mix, Collins found out, is what creates amazing financial results. So, clearly these Fortune 500 leaders don't walk inside boardrooms having a low opinion of themselves, right? Or thinking of themselves as meek, another bad definition for humility in a lot of dictionaries. Meek? Seriously? Who wants to be meek in a leadership role? Author Rick Warren wrote in The Purpose-Driven Life, humility is not thinking less of yourself. It's thinking of yourself less. So in essence, folks, humble leaders, they achieve greatness without arrogance. That's really the bottom line. So they shift from ego to humility. And in doing so, they can drastically alter the outcome to their advantage in business and really in life. So in my book, you're going to get a lot of good examples, case studies, and research references about how these crazy successful and humble leaders, how they communicate, how they engage employees, and how they really do business. So I'm happy to say that there are more authors writing whole books about humility. Okay, I only cover one chapter, but there's a brand new book out there that came across my desk that tackles the topic of humility throughout the book. The title of this book, and let me get it for you, is called Radical Humility. And there it is if you're watching on YouTube. Radical Humility, Be a Badass Boss and a Good Human. So, can you be both? Can you be a badass boss and a good human? I've worked for a few badass bosses before, at least in their own eyes, but they weren't exactly good humans at work. Maybe they were great, great people and parents and spouses, etc., in their own personal time, but at work, they were not good humans. They were more like bad humans who drove your ass into the ground. And the author of this book is a fascinating human being and a badass himself in the most positive way. We're going to be talking with Urs Koenig. And Urs is a former United Nations military peacekeeper, a NATO military peacekeeping commander, a highly accomplished ultra-endurance champion. He is a widely published professor and a seasoned executive coach and keynote speaker. He's also the founder of the Radical Humility Leadership Institute. His message has inspired teams from across the world, including Amazon, Starbucks, and Microsoft. We had a captivating conversation. It was really engaging. Urs is going to walk you through the why of humility, radical humility, and call us to the kind of humble leadership that makes business sense for all of us, that gets the best out of our people for good business outcomes. And don't forget, at the end of the episode, Urs and I are going to continue the conversation in the green room over on my Substack. And that's going to be a private conversation for paid subscribers that gives you specific tools and strategies. This is no longer a conversation. We're going to talk about how to actually equip you to become a better leader. So see the link in the show notes if you'd like to join us there after the episode. All right, let's dive in. Here is my conversation with Urs Koenig. Hey, gang. So Urs Koenig now joins us. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Marcel. That's one of the best pronunciations I've heard of my first name. I'm very impressed.
Yeah, and just so you know, offline I was practicing. So I was like, please help me not to butcher this name. So glad you're here. All right, so we started the episode like this. You ready?
Absolutely.
Because you have a story. So here it is. What's your story? You
just
have many.
One?
Just I was going to say, you have so many. How do we boil it down to one with your experience? My goodness.
I probably have several stories indeed. So, professionally, I have an academic story. I actually was a geographer way back. I wrote a PhD thesis in geography many years ago. So this is an academic story. There's an ultra-endurance sport story. I was a competitive cross-country skier in my home country, Switzerland, and then was a ultra cyclist, long races, 500 to 3,000 miles. There is a leadership development story. I've been in executive development for 20 plus years as a coach and as a speaker. And then there is the peacekeeping story. I went back after having been out for 22 years and served for the UN and NATO in peacekeeping missions in my 50s. But then there's personal stories too. So I'm a dad, I'm a brother, I'm a son. So my family's all in Europe. And so there's lots of different stories, but there's maybe one common theme, the military, ultra-endurance sports, academia, a lot of hardcore business results, bottom line driven environments. And I always was striving to bring a human element to that. So how can I be a kick-ass competitor on the bike and still be a good human being off it? How can I be a good peacekeeping officer and still be a good human? So that, is the title of my book, of course. So this Venn diagram has just been the story of my life. How do I achieve really cool, hard stuff, and at the same time, try to be the best human I possibly can? So that probably is the story of my life.
That's great. That's great. So I'm really intrigued, and maybe we could go down this rabbit hole with your UN peacekeeper. You were a NATO Peacekeeping Commander, right? So we are familiar with the military hierarchy of issuing out commands to others, et cetera. Okay, so I'm really curious about, because I saw your LinkedIn profile and your experience goes back before you got into this whole NATO and UN work. You were, I believe, a leadership coach or speaker before that, right? So I'm just curious. I mean, how did you get into that? What was the mindset to go on and take that role and become a UN peacekeeper?
Absolutely. So I have to go back into my childhood, if I may, actually, Marcel, if that's fine. So when I was 14, my dad, this is in the 80s, which, I show my age now. My dad volunteered to take 3 months of his high-powered corporate career and volunteer in a refugee camp in Somalia, in Mogadishu. I was 14. And I found that amazing. At 14, I admired my dad anyway. So it really inspired me to sort of, try to make my own contribution beyond my own small little world. I then actually studied geography because of that. I wanted to get into what was back then called overseas aid work. And then for a variety of reasons, I never actually followed through on that commitment to myself. I had, the sports, business, family, kids, lots of reasons why I couldn't do it. And then a couple of things happened. I was approaching 50. My dad, who as I shared, I was very close with, passed away recently. And I had a good hard look at my life. And I went, what are the things I don't want to look back on and say, I wish I would have done that? And doing meaningful international work was one of those things. And so then I started at 49 to really systematically research what my options are. And I didn't just, go for military peacekeeping. I looked at NGOs, I looked for government organizations. Where can I do meaningful international work? I call it mission work. It's not, not religious or spiritual mission work. And so I as part of that research, I found peacekeeping. And then I'm a Swiss citizen. We all have to serve, right, in my 20s. So I ticked all the boxes. I wanted to make money. I didn't want to volunteer, because when you're volunteering often, you're not valued because you're not paid. So I wanted to have some responsibility. But at 50, transitioning into something I have no background in was not straightforward. But peacekeeping, military peacekeeping, gave me that option. And so then, I was out of the service by then for 22 years. It was, in all humility, it was tough. I had to go back and interviews and physicals and psych evaluations and role plays and the whole shazam and apply. And then I got accepted and I had a very comprehensive training, and then joined after having been out for 22 years in 2017 to serve in the Balkans for NATO. So, my biggest fear, Marcel, going into this, because I'm a leadership guy, like an executive coach, My biggest fear was that I have a very weak commander, like a terrible boss, who might be 20 years younger than me, totally green, has no clue, and I have to do what they say. And so I was very conscious going into it, like I need to show up with humility. Like I just need to zip it, even if I think, and maybe I do actually know better, like just go in with a learning and beginner's mindset. And that's what I did. And I loved it. It's meaningful work. It's not without its problems, of course, but going back as somebody who's teaching and speaking about leadership into my client's shoes, direct reports, peers, matrix organization. I love leadership, speaking about it, writing about it, and living it. So that's how I got back into it.
So, okay, and I'm curious just to connect the dots between your, your peacekeeping work with humility. Did humility become important to you, become a shift in your life during the phase of working with UN and NATO, or did you have kind of a monumental, some kind of a paradigm shift about humility before that?
Mm-hmm. Probably the former, like not that extreme. So I was always drawn to humble leadership for the last 10 years. Shine and Shine published their groundbreaking book, Humble Leadership, which I was digging big time. But then you're absolutely right. Going back into the military, like counterintuitively, we think, and it still is in some ways, top-down command control, show me that the best commanders, the best leaders I actually have were deeply humble. They deeply self-aware. They built meaningful relationships with their team members. So the best commanders I had were deeply humble leaders. And I myself, we can talk about that later on in more depth. But because I was not up to date in terms of my military background, I knew initially I can't lead by expertise because I don't have it yet. I need to, study up with all my training, but I had a command. I had team members who knew so much more than I did about the military, how it's organized these days, how a staff works and whatnot. And so I had to lead what I call by relationship. Initially at least, while I worked my sweet behind off to get up to speed on the content, and get my skills up, because that's actually a very important point I often make. Humility is no replacement for competence on skills. Like it just isn't. Right. And so we need to have both. So yeah, I chose to lead relationally, and I had the best commanders, were deeply humble. So I come back from the second peacekeeping mission, the one in the Middle East, 2 years ago, three years ago now. And that's when I went, okay, there is something there. I need to write this book on humble leadership.
That's great. And we're going to weave in a lot more of your peacekeeping work into the storytelling, into our conversation. But I want to start with, how important is humility in today's leadership?
I think it's a leadership superpower. And of course, I'm slightly biased, right? I admit that.
You wrote the book.
right, exactly. But, I sort of make two main arguments. For those who are watching and listening, who are, very outcome-oriented and want business results, leading in today's fast-moving, complex world is by definition humbling. Like, you can't know it all and do it all yourself anymore. You just can't. So you need to have strong, empowered teams to get it done. So this heroic leadership paradigm that I talk about, the leader sits on top of the org chart, has all the answers, has all the information, everything flows through him or her. You're too slow. You slow everything down. If you lead like that, it's not going to work. So humility, I would put forward as a sort of big picture mindset, is a prerequisite to win in what we call the VUCA world, like volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. So that's number one. Number two, the workforce demands it. I mean, all the research out there shows that our younger generation, they not only want purpose, they don't only want meaning, but they want strong, meaningful relationships at work. Now I often say, you don't need to have your best friends at work. But I think there was one study coming out that showed that if you have a best friend at work, you're 7 times more likely to hang around. So talking about engagement, talking about retention. So there is a big picture need for it in terms of the external environment, and then the workforce is demanding it.
Yeah. All right. So you have this play between, you already mentioned heroic leadership. So that's the then way of leading to now way of leading, which is radical humility. What is a heroic leadership? You already said sits at the top of the hierarchy, but there might be a lot of people listening right now that are like, they might not know they're heroic leaders, and it's affecting them.
Yeah. So in my keynote, I talk about the movie The Hunt for Red October.
Sure.
Where Captain Ramius, steers the submarine into the torpedo's path before the torpedo is able to strike. Nobody knows about it. Like the whole submarine thinks they're going down, and Captain Ramius, Sean Connery, by himself, tells nobody, has this one plan, and heroically saves everybody, right? So it's great Hollywood material, but it's totally unrealistic. So what does heroic leadership mean? It means holding on to control too tightly, not sharing enough, and then not getting buy-in, right? I mean, have you been in that situation? I sure have, where I thought, oh yeah, I have everybody on the bus, but not so much. They're all in the back, right? And so that's one. Not delegating. I mean, such a, almost a cliche, but a basic thing, not delegating enough and heroically doing my team members' work because I wanted to get it done just right, just the way I wanted, and we often celebrate it. Oh, amazing, stayed up all night, like, no, that's heroic leadership, and it's not effective because you're going to burn out eventually. So these are two examples of what heroic leadership looks like. And then, it's important to point out here too, that as leaders, we want to be asked for a lot of advice. We want to make a lot of decisions. We want to be involved. Why? It makes us feel important. And if we're honest, we all have that need, right? And so we have to really fight that need to be involved in everything just in order to make us feel important and push decision-making down.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, so speaking of, you mentioned the heroic leadership, there's a lot of myths around that it is really a false belief system that if you lead that way, you're going to be successful, and maybe you will be at the detriment of your workforce and the health of your employees, not to mention your own health. But there's also myths about humble leadership. And I would love to dismantle right now, you and me. Let's just knock down some of these myths, prevailing myths that keeps leaders from the then of heroic leadership shifting to the humble leader. So what would be those myths that get in the way of that transition?
Yeah, people often tell me, well, if I show up with humility, I'm a pushover, I have no spine, I have no confidence. And so the confidence piece, that's a very common myth. Like, how can I show up with humility while being confident? Seemingly a contradiction. I argue, no. I argue it's actually a prerequisite to show up with humility that you're fundamentally confident in yourself. Only if I have a strong sense of self and know my strengths and weaknesses can I actually, with humility, ask for feedback. Hey, Marcel, what am I doing well as your leader or manager? What can I do better? If I'm insecure, if I have lots of hang-ups I haven't worked through, I find it very difficult to ask that question and hear the feedback and then act on it. But if I have a strong, confident sense of self, then I can show up with that, vulnerability, which is a piece of humility, and, for example, ask for that feedback. So I argue, in order to really show up with true humility, you need to be actually fundamentally confident in yourselves. So that's one.
That's a great hook for getting into your first shift, because a lot of us don't have the self-awareness. We haven't built enough self-awareness. We haven't asked for enough feedback to understand our true self. So should we dive in on your shift?
Let's do it.
All right. So, and by the way, folks, I mean, Urs' book is really a sort of a guide to making that transition. So if you feel like you come from or you're currently operating in a heroic leadership style and you feel that's holding you back, these are the shifts that leaders are being called to in this book, Radical Humility. Okay, so shift number one is dig deep. But more specifically, what I wanted to touch on is what you called, you have to know thyself. Okay, so we talked a lot about self-discovery, feedback, but expand on that for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So when people think of humility, that's what they often think of. I see myself accurately. I see myself in line with how others see us. And by the way, we will never get there. It's impossible. Like it's always work in progress. We're all work in progress. You know, the famous Johari window, the blind spots, we all have them, even if we're super self-aware. And so but we need to strive towards minimizing those blind spots. And so the notion is really, to know thyself. And there is, two very practical things that we can do. It's an iterative process to some extent. It's the very simple thing we just talked about. At the end of every one-on-one, do I ask my teammates, what do I do well as your manager, and what can I do better? Don't do it every 6 months. Don't do it because then it's a big, scary thing. Institutionalize it and give your people a heads up too, by the way, that you're going to ask that question before you just blindside them and they're not quite sure what to say. What can I do better? And what do I do well as your manager? And I'm certainly work in progress, Marcel, but that's one thing I do very well in all my leadership positions. And I'm blown away how my direct reports always say, you're the first person who ever asked these questions, right? And you learn things before they become big things. I have a little story in the book where, as an old officer, I would come back from the field and I would drop my sidearm on my desk and start working on my computer. But the rules changed. Either it's locked up, in the safe that the weapon is, or it's on your body. And I sort of didn't know about it or didn't want to know about it, I guess, and really bugged my young officers. So during my one-on-one, I asked, what can I do better? And he said, hey, you can't do that. It's a small thing, but before it becomes a big thing, easy to fix. So that's the asking for feedback. I also then think about deep introspection. And there, again, it's a very simple thing, journaling. How do I reflect on the feedback I'm receiving? What are the things I want to get better at? So journaling is an incredibly powerful way to reflect then on what comes back and really to know thyself. The one other thing I would say about feedback, leadership is not a popularity contest. I always ask, we always listen, we always thank, but you and I get to decide as the leader what I'm acting on, because we're not naive. Everybody who gives me feedback has their own agenda as well. Like, let's be real, right? So it's a thinking person sport, right? So if I start to get patterns in sort of similar themes coming back, then that's maybe something I need to look at. So that's the feedback. And if I may, in terms of the digging deep, there's another really important element, which is part of humble leadership. It's this notion of focus, having the humility to know that I can't do everything. I really can't, but I can do almost anything I put my mind to. So this is about the humility to know my limits, also as a leader, and to say no, push it back against the social grain. The very simple tool here is a stop doing list. When's the last time I kept a stop? I have all my to-do lists all over my place. What do I need to stop doing as an organization? What projects do we need to kill? Because, they just don't add value anymore. So this whole notion of focus, and there I really love to think about athletes who are masters at doing that, right? Greg Searle, the Olympic rowing champion, said, I've never made sacrifices, I only made choices. And that's a wonderful metaphor for focusing and saying no.
Yeah, a couple of things that come up for me, Urs, is that to make that leap from heroic leadership to humble leadership will also take a tremendous amount of courage. Yeah. And that's the part where you need to just check your ego at the door if you're going to embark in this journey, right? You got to be courageous. And what I mean by that is the courage to believe that you're going to see something great come out on the other side. When you choose this route, things are going to become much better for you. And that's the courage piece. If you really believe, okay, I'm committed, I'm dedicated to growing in this fashion. I want to be more humble. I want to create more loyalty with my employees. This is the path to do it, but you're going to have to give up a lot of the control and the power that you hold on to now.
You're so right. I mean, and just to be clear, I mean, obviously I'm biased, but there is a clear movement in the business world towards more humility in leadership. I have plenty of stories in the book, but one I'd like to share quickly is the former CEO of the financial technology company Intuit, Brad Smith. He's now president at Marshall University. he volunteered to his board when he was CEO to do a 360. So many of you viewers probably know a 360 anonymously surveys everybody around you, around your strengths and weaknesses as a leader. And when you're doing it for the first time, it's a very scary exercise because it's anonymous, right? So Smith, as the top dog at Intuit, volunteered. He wasn't told to do it. He volunteered to do it. He then shared his report with the entire company. He emailed his 360 to like down to the first year associate, to the intern. Everyone at Intuit saw how Brad Smith, the CEO, was assessed by his direct reports. Talk about putting yourself out there. Courage. You just mentioned that. Like, that's exactly right. It requires courage. The soft stuff. I get very passionate about this, apparently. Like the soft stuff of building more self-awareness, showing up with vulnerability, which we can talk about. Like, it's not soft. The soft stuff is tough. In the military, we often think about courage, going up against the enemy with a machine gun. But and that's courage, of course, for sure. But the real courage is to actually work on the soft stuff, do things or say things others don't have the courage to do or say in a team environment.
Yeah. Feel free to jump in on vulnerability. We're all about that here. But I want to touch on the second shift.
Yeah.
You labeled it tough on results, tender on people. And that reminds me of Gary Ridge, the former CEO of the WD-40 company out in San Diego. He is famous for saying, be tough-minded and tender-hearted, right? That's part of his thought leadership and speaking engagements. So that immediately came to mind. So you write in one of the chapters that you have to give a damn about others. I wish I could say that in a Swiss accent, but
that's right.
So what does giving a damn about others entail? What does that mean? Yeah.
So giving a damn about others means getting to know your teammates on a more meaningful and personal level. I mean, that's basically in a nutshell, and that encompasses a lot of things. Like, do I actually understand what's going on for my teammates outside of work, right? Are they caring for an aging parent? They have young kids at home. Like, what hobbies are they into? It sounds like mundane stuff, but that's where it starts. Do I understand, importantly, their career aspirations? Are we regularly talking, and we can talk about the leadership factor in a little bit, are we regularly talking about where they want to go? Do I understand their aspirations? So giving a damn about my people or others means seeing them as whole human beings. And, you would say with love, and I agree, with love, instead of just, worker bees who get stuff done for me. So it's, moving from transactional to more meaningful relationship. I have a little anecdote about this. In Kosovo, I had a wonderful commander, probably the best commander I've ever had. And he called me to his office. And that never happened before. I'm like, oh, no. And so I sit down and he opens the meeting with these words. He says, Urs, I love you. I do. But your work is not even close to being good enough. His words made me shrink in my chair. And so, and of course, I, worked my feet behind off to fix everything that I messed up, which I really did, the previous week. But the point here is, he didn't just say, I love you. I know he did, because he took a keen interest in me. He knew my family. He knew my family situation. He knew where I wanted to go career-wise. He gave a damn about me. He told me that. And then I was able to hear his feedback. If he would have yelled at me, chewed me out, you know what? I would have tuned him out. Unless another high-ranking idiot officer, like, who gives, whatever. So, but being tender on people gives me license to be tough on results, right? So our feedback is so much more likely to be heard and acted upon if we've built meaningful relationships with our teammates. So that's what it is in a nutshell.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Okay, so I love the that you've dropped the platinum rule and you attach of leadership.
Right.
Because we all know the golden rule, right? Treat others like you want to be treated, but platinum rule takes it up a notch. You want to explain to our listeners the importance of it in leadership?
Absolutely. I mean, the golden rule, if you think about it, is slightly self-centered, right? So you assume everybody wants to be treated the way you want to be treated. It's not actually true. The platinum rule states that you treat them the way they want to be treated.
Exactly.
Right. And you need to be able to know them, their working style, their preferred way of receiving information, their preferred way of being held accountable. Some people, I actually encourage all of us to have these sort of conversations, like, an expectation conversation. What are my rules of engagement working with me, and what works best for you? How does feedback best land for you? So the platinum rules requires me to really know my people on a meaningful level, so I can treat them the way they want to be treated. I had an officer in this was in the Middle East, actually, who basically told me, like, I need to be yelled at. Like, he didn't say it just like that, but pretty much, like, I need to get a lot of very, very tough love from you to get the stuff done. I had another member who that would have worked at all, right? And so this is, what we talk about when we talk about situational leadership. I need to show up differently. Again, back to thinking as person sport, according to who I'm dealing with and the needs of my teammates.
Yeah, that's good. Treat others the way they want to be treated. Yeah, we got to apply that more in the leadership realm. Okay, section 3 is lead like a compass. And in that section, you talk about transforming your team into a leadership factory. What do you mean by that?
So building a leadership factory means basically making it the explicit goal for my immediate team to produce the next generation of leaders for our organization. And so this is, a humble mindset of taking pride in my team members' success, helping them to go to the next level. And, this sounds very, selfless. Oh, I'm, a wonderful human being. I help my team members to go to the next level. Some people actually push back because, we have talent shortage as it is. Like, they're going to leave and I'm going to lose them and whatnot. And by the way, they will leave anyway. Let's just be real, right? People move on to greener pastures as they should. But what happens when you turn in your teams into leadership factories, you become a talent magnet. Why? People see, hey, on Marcel's team, everybody goes to different cool new jobs, either within the organization or somewhere else. Like, I want to work for that guy. Like, right. He really takes care of his team. He mentors them, he grows them, he coaches them. And so, a lot of the leaders I work with in the latter parts of their career, they're really proud. When they think of their legacy, is it really like how much profit they were able to create, how many sales numbers they hit or whatever? For a lot of them, it's the people they've built and their success of the people they mentored and how far their people have gone. So that's their legacy. And I certainly feel this. I was very proud during my missions, for example, where a lot of my teammates went on to have amazing jobs all over the world in peacekeeping missions. And, I take a tiny, small little credit for that, for doing my part to help them succeed. So that's what I mean by a leadership factory.
Yeah. And for those of you that are maybe fearing pumping so much resources and development into your employees and making them better so they can succeed, and the fear of losing them. Well, listen, so here's a question. Why would I want to leave a place like that, working for that kind of boss? I mean, that's what's going to create loyalty and commitment in the people. People are they're starving, I think. Urs, tell me if you agree with me. I think that they are starving for these kinds of environments, especially for those of us that career development and growth, professional development, whether it's personal or professional, really is one of the big hot buttons these days. I read the data, and this is what people are longing for, but it's so hard to find these environments with these kind of cultures and these kinds of leaders that will pour into you and help you to grow as human beings. So the question is, well, if that is happening to me, why would I want to leave you, right?
Well, and it's almost a cliche, but people don't leave jobs; they leave bad bosses. Right? And people hang around. I mean, I just had a conversation yesterday with a speaking client where, one particular team member, she's not actually crazy about the content of her job, but she loves the people. She loves her boss. She hangs around, even if, the job might be not actually what she really is enjoying. So you're absolutely right. People hang around, no question about it.
Yeah. I'll bring that whole little segment down to this statement, and I'm quoting Urs now: transforming your team into a leadership factory turns you into talent magnet because people see a future with you.
Right.
So that's profound. All right, let's shift to shift 4. Again, if you want to make the transition from heroic leadership to radical humility or humble leadership, it's going to take full transparency. Okay, the part about full transparency that really resonated with me is share the truth, and this is really all about honesty and openness, something that I feel is severely lacking in certain sectors of our society. Urs and I were joking offline earlier. Yeah, this is really tricky, about which sector of society that we see now in the news a lot that is drastically lacking honesty and openness.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, but this is really all about let's have the best idea win, not necessarily my idea. And by the way, let's also not be naive. Like, we can't always be 100% fully transparent about everything in a business environment. Certain things are confidential. Like, I understand all that, right? And yet, as leaders, I see it over and over again. We don't share nearly enough. And when we think we do, we're still not even halfway there. I mean, there's research done where, I think I quote that somewhere, where people who actually are tasked with implementing their corporate strategy can't even name the top 3 strategic initiatives. I mean, imagine that. Like, so that means it's not being communicated enough from the top. So it's about sharing. I have a little exercise in there, actually, they're called the 5 whys. So 5 whys comes from manufacturing. The idea is to go, Toyota first started it, to go from the symptom to a root cause of a problem. But I encourage all of us to do something similar with the 5 whys, but explain the 5 whys behind our decisions as leaders. So if we're deciding to hire somebody new or discontinue a product or whatever, let's work through the 5 whys with our teammates so they really understand where we're coming from. So this is about full transparency, about sharing, and we can almost not overshare in terms of a business context. So I have another on this, if we can talk about vulnerability for a second. Marcel, can we? Yeah, so yes. An important piece is being vulnerable is also part of transparency, and saying, hey, I messed that up and I can do better. So in the Middle East, I had a commanding officer. She opened an after-action review with these words. She said, I screwed that up and I know it. And here's what I'm going to do to get better. By the way, vulnerability, I think about it in 3 acts. The first act is me. The second act is my share, maybe a goal I have, something I messed up, maybe an insecurity. And the third act is, what am I doing about it? Right? So let's go all 3 acts with the vulnerability. But my peacekeeping commander, she owned her stuff. What do you think happened afterwards when we went around the room? All of us, we mirrored her behavior because she went first, right? And made it safe for everybody to own their own mess ups. And this was actually, an amazing after-action review, which led to much better operations on the ground. Once again, tying humble, vulnerable leadership to outcome business results. Our operational effectiveness improved by 25% because of the things we implemented based on that after-action review. So, Brené Brown, of course, the queen of psychological safety, says vulnerability is the last thing I want to show you, and it's the first thing I'm looking for in you. Right? So it's this connection piece.
Yeah. Vulnerability is attributed to Brené Brown and then Amy Edmondson. And we're going to talk about that in a minute, how she did all the research on psychological safety. Okay. But before we transition to that last shift, which is championing a fearless culture, you have a really good story that really ties into, I think, vulnerability and transparency. So you were in Kosovo. You had a team, you're doing peacekeeping work. And I know that in those environments, I mean, work, it can take a toll on you, right? You start to experience fatigue. And then things start to kind of go by the wayside. You communicate less, and you sweep things under the rug, and people are just maybe exhausted. I know, and they let their guards down, and then some toxic behaviors start to appear. So talk a little bit about that story. What exactly happened? Because you kind of went off on your team.
Yeah, I did actually, which one could argue. When I wrote the book, I got some pushback about this because that's not exactly humble. So what happened? So we're towards the end of our mission, like the last week, and what you just described there, Marcel, is mission fatigue. We all feel it. We just want to get out of there and go home. So there was a lot of borderline toxic behavior. People weren't collaborating anymore, and it was not good. And I was not scared. I was concerned about two things, about the quality of our work, but I was also worried about our safety because, at the end of the mission, people let the guard down, and that's when accidents happen. So yeah, I summoned them on a day off in uniform, like 1,400 hours to a meeting, and I went off at them, and I raised my voice. I didn't exactly yell. I didn't name call. I raised my voice, said, this is unacceptable. And they were talking behind each other's back. It's the super childish stuff. So I ordered them to have a one-on-one with each member of the team where they had to air out their grievances with that person, including me, by the way, one-on-one for the next 3 hours. So 15-minute chunks. And I said, it was a direct order. You will do this right now. We have the evening off after that. And tomorrow morning, we start and we finish the mission, the last 5 days, as one strong team. They didn't like it. But they did it. And I learned some things about myself. They all came to my office as well and had a chat about what bugs them about me. And so the point here is that humble leadership sometimes can mean that you raise your voice. Sometimes it means you give clear, direct orders. But let me be very clear. This is not about name calling. This is not about, yelling per se. It's about being firm. It's about being direct. And it ties into the last shift, actually. It's about inviting feedback, all with the goal of raising performance.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, tough-minded and tender-hearted. There you go again.
Right.
Hearing Gary Ridge's voice in my head. Yeah. Okay, so let's just transition to the last shift of experiencing more radical humility. How do we do that? And you named it. I touched on it earlier. Champion a fearless culture. Wow, that's talking about maybe systemically, how do we implement strategies to become a more fearless culture? But by your definition, what does that mean? And how do we do that?
So this is very much based on, as you mentioned earlier, on Amy Edmondson's groundbreaking work. She really, is the queen of psychological safety out of Harvard. What does it mean? It means creating and this is, as you said, it's organizational leadership. This is how I built a team in terms of the culture. It's about making it safe for anybody to speak up with questions, concerns, crazy ideas, doubts, without fear of being shamed or worse, risking their career. And to be clear, it's not about standing around in a circle, holding hands, singing Kumbaya. No, it's not. It's about being direct, inviting feedback, being open to that feedback, and again, making it so that everybody feels their voice is heard. It doesn't mean that we agree. And the research on psychological safety is, it's 30 years old. For those of you listening, you're familiar with the work that, again, Amy Edmondson did. And then Google, really popularized it and showed that the best predictor of their best team's performance is a culture of psychological safety. It's more important than who's on the team, the size, the tenure, and if it's virtual or in person. So the business case is crystal clear, but it's hard to do. And so, I think Amy tells this story, I love this, about a United Airlines captain. And the captain opens every crew meeting with these words. He said, "I've never done a perfect flight before, and I'm going to prove it to you again today." Now imagine you're just standing in the galley there, about to take your seat. You're like, what the hell? We're going down here. But he goes on and says, I've never done a perfect flight before, and I'm going to prove it to you again today. So I need you. I need you to speak up when you see me do something wrong, and I will do the same for you. What does the captain do? The captain is praising the messenger versus punishing the messenger, making it safe for everybody on the crew to speak up, so that mistakes that are made by individuals, including himself, the CEO of the plane, the captain, are caught by the collective. And, the most important outcome improves, which is it's the safer flight. So psychological safety, quite literally, can save lives. And so it's about reframing failure. I have a little framework in there. It's about reframing failure for our teammates and talking about the different kind of failures that we're facing. And when's the last time you had a conversation with your teammates about how we deal with failures in our team? Probably never, right? And so that's actually a really fruitful and wonderful conversation to be had. What sort of failures are acceptable, and what sort of failures do we absolutely need to avoid? But we need to hear about all of them. So that's the reframing failure. It's about speaking up, encouraging speaking up. I just talked about the United Airlines captain, and there's plenty of examples. Alan Mullally's turnaround at the Ford company is legendary for how he built psychological safety. So the business case is crystal clear out there.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Amy as well. I had her on the show a couple of times. Cool. I see also such an interplay or overlapping between psychological safety and vulnerability, to create safe spaces for people to be vulnerable. And there's your connection right there. All right. So if I'm a leader, and there are many, especially if I'm a CEO, and we talked about the organizational side of creating more radical transparency. Okay, how do I begin this journey?
I have to clarify the question. So do you mean radical humility or radical transparency?
Radical humility. Radical humility.
Okay. So look, I think at the core of it, if you want to start with one thing, it's schedule one deepening the relationship meeting with one of your teammates, like literally. Push yourself, and it starts with a conversation. Like Shine, in their groundbreaking book, Humble Leadership, talk about relationship building starts with a conversation. It's not rocket science. Schedule a meeting, plan how you're going to ask questions that are maybe a little bit more personal, maybe a little bit uncomfortable, how you're going to share about yourself. And then you need to read the room, by the way. If the other person pushes back and doesn't want to open up, then you don't go there. This is actually an important point. Just very briefly, I know you want to talk about takeaways, but we will have different levels of depth of relationship with different people in our team. And that's totally fine. We're not a fraud or a fake because of that. Some people want to talk about end of life and the meaning of life and everything else. And other people, it's about the soccer match of the kids on the weekend. And that's totally fine. But push yourself to get to know one team member on a more meaningful level, understand their personal situation, understand their career aspiration, where do I want to go, how can I support them? So that's one very simple thing.
That's perfect. All right. Well, we bring it home with two final questions, as we do with every guest. The first one is the traditional love question. I always have to say the word love like in a manly tone, Urs. Love question. So sticking with themes of radical humility, how do I lead with more practical, actionable love day in and day out?
So I already talked about getting to know my teammates. I push myself this week to give two of my teammates positive feedback on something I've seen them do outstandingly well, or even very well, right? So we don't do enough positive feedback. We just don't. We don't give enough praise. Let's call something out, and if it's appropriate, let's call it out publicly at the team or department meeting. So that's one practical thing where I can think of that we can, in practical terms, lead with more love.
Yeah, love it. Okay. Well, you close us out. Every guest gets to close us out with a key takeaway, or if you want a mic drop moment, it's up to you. So what can we take home with us?
Take home, tough on results, tender on people. The notion that we either have to be a good human or a tough leader is a false dichotomy. We can all courageously do hard things in a human way.
That's great. And I love the interplay, by the way, and it's in your subtitle. I'm going to put it up on the screen. You know, the title is there, Radical Humility, but to be a badass leader, which I think most of us would love to be badass in a very good way, right? A badass leader, a productive, result-oriented leader. That speaks to the radical side of leadership. Just like servant leadership, you have the leadership side, which is the tough side of leadership. And then a good human. There's the vectogram again. Is that, what did you call it?
A Venn diagram.
A Venn diagram, yeah. And a good human. So be a badass leader and a good human. All right. So if people want to connect with you, I'd love to send a bunch of people your way right now to learn more about you or the book. Where can they go?
Absolutely. So I'm on the web at urskoenig.com for my keynote speaking, my workshops, and then I'm primarily on LinkedIn. So I love to hear from readers and listeners on LinkedIn. I'm very active there. And then, of course, pick up my book wherever books are sold, including Amazon.
Yeah. And folks, I kid you not, this book, if you like practical books, there is very few books that, a lot of books are heavy on theory and big ideas. Urs' book has some of that, but it is chock full of tools and strategies and self-assessment questions and just a lot of great practical stuff. So I highly recommend it. And speaking of practical stuff, okay, we're going to continue this conversation over in the green room, which is exclusive to my Substack premium subscribers. And again, the link is in the show notes, and would love for you to join there. So remember, only in the green room are you going to get more tools, strategies, and skills building to make you a more effective leader. So head on over there, and we'll see you in the green room. So for Urs Koenig, I'm Marcel Schwantes. Keep loving well, and we'll see you next time. Ciao, everybody.
Thank you for listening to the Love in Action podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it, subscribe, and leave us a review. Until next time, don't forget, the future of leadership is love in action. Believe it, practice it, and watch your leadership and business flourish.